This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
Sometimes your best leader, if you're the CEO, the people you think of as your best leaders are actually terrible leaders. And the
Yeah.
reason that is because what you're grading them on is their ability to meet your objectives. Those
Yeah.
objectives are probably financial and quite dehuman by that point.
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Sean Lemson. Sean is a leadership expert and an executive and team performance coach. He is the founder of Motivated Outcomes, an organization devoted to improving performance, engagement, and leadership in today's organizations. He founded this company with one single mission: to help make work a place people want to be again. He is the author of a brand new book called One Drop of Poison: How One Bad Leader Can Slowly Kill Your Company, which was selected by CEO World Magazine as one of the top 5 books to read on principled leadership. I'm excited to have him on the show to talk about how companies poison their own success by hiring or promoting bad bosses. So, Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an honor to meet you, and thanks for doing what you're doing, because I think it's an important topic. But I wanted to ask you, what compelled you to start writing about bad bosses?
Well, I think like you, I've had my share of bad bosses over the years. I think what makes it different for me is that most of my life I've been a bit of a hobbyist psychologist. I probably would do that again if I started my life over. I might become a psychologist. I really like that kind of work, kind of what makes the human mind tick. So you can imagine when you're either on the receiving end of a bad boss and you have a hobby in psychology, you kind of tend to do a little armchair psychology with the motivations and the behaviors that you see this person doing that are both demotivating you but also demotivating your peers, right? You can there's water cooler conversation and everybody's talking about the boss and what they just said and why everybody's demoralized now and so on. And you just, over many years you just start to spot patterns. You start seeing um, certain things that you realize are the kinds of behaviors that cause people to not want to put in their best. And I think also we've known what motivates human beings for, since 1950. I mean, there's been so much work on this, and it just boggles my mind that that American businesses particularly tend to ignore most of the well-founded psychology we have about human motivation. So, they're all complaining about we can't get people working faster, we can't get working fast, and yet they're ignoring the science that we've had for 70 years. So yeah, that's why I decided to write this book.
It's really interesting too, because I mean, we see, engagement, employee engagement. That number hasn't changed much. From about 30% of employees are engaged, 70% are disengaged. That number hasn't changed over the years. And yet there's been all these books written on leadership. People are always talking about leadership, but yet you're right, it doesn't seem to change. We still have the same sort of bad leaders being promoted, being hired, being encouraged, and yet not much is being done about it. So my hat's off to you for being one of the few that are trying to stand up and say something about it. So let's get into the idea of toxic leadership. So what in your definition is toxic leadership, and what makes it so toxic?
So yeah, let's be real crisp about that because I think that'll set us up for a nice conversation. A lot of us, when we're thinking about toxic leaders, we might be thinking of a really extreme example of somebody who just destroyed our morale or our self-esteem, and I have examples like that, of course. But I'd like to say that a toxic leader, at least by my definition, is someone whose behavior is intentionally or likely unintentionally working against their own interest in terms of getting employees to want to follow them, right? I mean, so we kind of have to break down toxic and leadership, because toxic is like I'm doing something that I may not even be thinking is toxic, right? But it's landing very toxically in terms of the team wanting to stay, in terms of them wanting to be engaged, in terms of them wanting to, think about solutions to our problems in the shower versus clocking out at 5 and not wanting to think about work at all. So that's what I think of as toxic. Any behavior that is sort of poisoning that, making it so that people aren't engaged. But let's also focus on the word leader, because not everyone who has direct reports is a leader, right? And I would say not every leader has direct reports. So one of the things that I ask people is, I'll often trick people and I'll say, so what do you think the one thing that good leaders have? What's the one thing that all leaders have? And they'll always give me, courage, or, vision, or, whatever, all the things you can imagine. But it's actually simple. They have followers. That's it. If they look over their shoulder and people are following them, if they leave their company and people leave the company to follow them, they are leaders. Okay. So if you don't have that, you're a manager. You're not a leader.
Mm.
You're just ticking the box and telling people what to do, but you don't have people actually willing to follow you.
I love how you break that up into, because I think sometimes when we think toxic leadership, we just think of that one really bad extreme boss, and everybody can remember the one really bad one, right? But it's all these other ones that are, again, not leaders, or they're just not doing anything in their behaviors to be able to motivate their team. I talk about leadership being it's all about motivating a group of people to get something difficult done, right? That's the three elements of leadership. And so if you're not working on setting goals, motivating a team, and building the right team to get then you're not doing leadership. You're doing something else. You're doing emails, you're sitting in meetings,
Yeah.
but you're not doing leadership. You're doing something else. So I love that you address the fact that it's not necessarily just that one extreme bad boss. It's a number of other behaviors or personality types. Well, just one question as it comes to me: do you think that bad bosses know they're bad?
No. In fact, I'm really glad you brought that up, because, I often tell people that toxic leaders are not waking up every morning thinking, how can I destroy my team today? They're not
Yeah.
plotting to do this. This is not the outcome they want. Most likely, they have a mindset about leadership, which we can definitely talk about and should talk about, because I think it's a key part of how people behave in their leadership positions. But people have a mindset about leadership, and they have goals and objectives that have been given to them by their company, their culture, whatever. And what they're doing is they're operating inside that culture with those goals and those incentives, and they're doing what they think is the right thing to do to get people to
Mm.
do those things. My argument is that once you kind of see all the toxic behaviors and the way that you can be showing up in a toxic way for your teams, it's kind of hard to unsee them. I mean, one of the most interesting experiences I've had since writing this book is I've had some people who in my life I think of as really great leaders, who read my book and then contacted me and said, "Hey, I spotted myself in one of your archetypes." And I was like,
Mm.
"Really? I don't see that in you, but I've not been led by you. I just think of you as a great leader, somebody that I've coached or I would follow." And it turns out, even the best leaders that we have, if you're really good at paying attention to your own behavior, you can spot toxic things that you're doing, that kind of fit into one of these archetypes I've come up with, these 10 archetypes. And it helps you to reverse that behavior.
We're going to get into those archetypes because I think it's brilliant what you've done there. But just, you know, what are some signs, like if you say, like you said, people don't get up every morning and say, I'm going to do evil today, right? I think you think you're a good boss, but what are maybe some signs that they might not actually be a good boss, that they might actually have some toxic behaviors that they need to address?
Well, I wouldn't say there are signs. Before I would give signs, I would say that I would tell you to lean on metrics, and you won't hear me say that very often because I'm not a, I believe in metrics, but there's one particular thing that I think every company should be measuring, which is engagement. Every company should be measuring engagement, and in a way that they can, so that the individual responses are anonymous, but the results are coded in such a way that we can at least see if there are pockets of low engagement. Do they all roll up to one manager? Do they all roll up to a senior leader? Is there a division? Is it a team? Is it, what you need to be able to see? Not just, oh, our engagement scores are low at the company, but oh, they're low here, but not over here, right? And um, that those signs, that those metrics are really great for knowing whether you're showing up toxically, because unfortunately this is one of those things that human beings are very good at obscuring when they feel like their job security is on the line, right? Like, so I often tell people, if you're doing an engagement survey, I watch for two signs of a lack of safety at your company. One, low engagement in the survey itself, meaning nobody actually
Yeah.
takes the survey, low participation in the survey. That's one. The other one is a perfect score. Okay.
Oh,
I'm not saying that I don't believe it, but they're rare. And so when I see really high engagement scores, but I can spend 10 minutes at the company and see that that culture doesn't support those scores, I know I've got a safety problem.
yeah.
So
Oh,
that's the answer. The
absolutely.
short answer to your question is, because you measured it well and you can see these scores being low. The other way you might see it is if you can't hold on to any team members. Your
Hmm.
team, your turnover is really high. People just keep leaving the team, and you keep saying things to yourself like, "We just can't find good people here. Nobody wants to
Hmm.
stay," and you find yourself wanting to blame the company or the culture. Hey, it may be you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I had a student one time. I teach at grad school sometimes, and a student tells me, he's like, "How can you tell if you're a good leader or a bad leader?" And I said, one of the things I said to her is like, if you walk up to a group of people, like you come into a room and there's a group of people talking, and they suddenly go quiet when you walk up, there's a little bit of a sign you have some work to do. Like
That's right. I would
they're
agree with that. That's a good one.
they're
Yeah.
not taking you by the arm and say, "Hey, Joe, we were just talking about this problem. What do you think about it?" Instead, they're like, "Oh, Joe's here. Shut up."
Yeah.
Right?
I
So
used to have well, it doesn't work anymore because the comic strip is kind of gone now, but back when Dilbert was all the rage,
mm.
I used to have a Dilbert index where I could walk into a company and just see how many people had cutouts of Dilbert comics all over their desk, and it was like the more I saw, the more trouble I knew I was in. Yeah.
So true. Yeah, the Dilbert boss is a
Yeah.
certain, maybe that is an archetype that you have. But
Yeah.
let's dive into this because I think it's interesting, and then we'll kind of come back to some other things. But you mentioned there's at least 10 archetypes or styles of toxic leadership. Can you give us an example of a couple of examples of those, and the impact those archetypes or styles have on the organization?
Sure. So probably one of the most common ones is the chess master. The chess master is somebody who believes that leadership is a privilege or a reward, and that they were obviously promoted because they're brilliant and their answers are brilliant. So they don't need to get any answers from their teams. They just give the teams they just bark out orders. They treat their employees like chess pieces on a chessboard, which is why I call them the chess master. When you work for a chess master, it is a very disempowering experience. The higher you are up in your skill set, it'll be harder and harder for you to work for a chess master, because chess masters don't really want your brain, they want your hands.
Hmm.
And when you think that the value you add to the company is your brain, you are going to feel very disempowered working for a chess master. So that's probably one of the most common ones, and it's cultural also, because depending on where you were raised, there are certain cultures that do treat leadership as a privilege, and so if you were raised in those cultures, you can take that with you into your leadership mindset, and that's what we can talk about that too. But these
Just a quick
all boil
question.
down to that.
Quick question on that, because that's one of the things that I can't stand. Because my start of my career as a naval officer on a submarine, and submarines are a unique military environment in that the officers and senior enlisted didn't get a lot of special privileges. We were all in a metal tube under the ocean for months at a
Mhm.
time. So I can't stand people who expect special perks because they are the leader. And so one of the things I do when I come into a company, when I take over, is I get rid of a lot of the perks. Like one of the ones is special parking. Like that's the first thing
Oh,
I do when I walk in. I'll
yeah,
paint over all of the management parking into and open it up for employees. And I do it on purpose because it signals like this I don't want chess masters. I am not a chess master. I am here. I have a job just like everybody else. Mine might be different than yours, but I'm not better than you.
that's right.
And that's one of the things that frustrates me about that. So I like that you pointed this out because I've seen a lot of managers like that. They believe the perks are why they became a leader in the first place, not to make a difference or to impact an organization. It's because they want the perks of the job.
Yeah, and I would say that if this topic interests your listeners, they should read the book The Motive from Patrick Lencioni. It's probably one of his best books. I remember listening to a podcast interview he did when that book came out, and he said, "This may be my most recent book, but I wish it was my first because it's the most important part about leadership, which is what is your motive for
Yes.
leadership?" And when I'm working with chess masters and trying to get them to finish or to change, I will ask, "What's your motive?" Right? And
Mm.
we really do tackle their motive to figure out if that's the right motive and can they change that motive.
Yeah, yeah, I always say that, and that's one of the things I say in my books too. Is if you want to be a leader, first ask yourself why. You know, why do you
Right.
want to be there? And the best leaders, I think, they become leaders because they want to make a difference. Not that they want to make money or they want the job or the title or the perks or the corner office. They want to make a difference, and they feel like the best way they can make a difference is being in that kind of, senior leadership role.
Yeah, and I would even say that this is one of those insidious ways that companies can poison themselves.
Mm,
They can create no career path for individual contributors that gets them more money and still allows them to be an individual contributor, right? So, for example, if you limit the number of these upper echelon positions that people can work themselves into, then what'll happen is they'll jump from individual contributor positions to
yes.
leadership positions just to get the money. They don't have any interest in leading anyone, they just want the money. And that's how we end up with a lot of toxic leaders in companies from just that one HR policy, or it could be finance. It's usually between the two of them that limits this role or limits the pathway of somebody financially who's an individual contributor.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's a big issue, and too many companies don't have a path for individual contributors. So thanks for bringing that up. I really
Yeah.
think it's a big part of it. So, well, any others that you want to mention?
Yeah, so I can, boy, all 10 of them really are great. They all have their own little kind of individual niche. I think I would say there's a couple more that we could talk about. One would be the invertebrate. That one's pretty fast to talk about because I think people who've had a boss who this is classic of somebody who's conflict avoidant, because the idea here that you're not trying to get into conflicts as a leader, but being able to face and resolve a conflict is definitely from time to time a leadership position, something that the other employees that you have are counting on. So, if you have a brilliant, I'll just use the nice word, if you have a brilliant jerk on your team and everyone else is being bullied by this person, if you're an invertebrate, that team is done for because they need you to stand up to that person and get them in line or get rid of them so that they have a pot, basically subtracting to add, right? Might have to subtract somebody from the team to add to the rest. Um, let's see. I would say the other one that's kind of interesting is the data freak, which this one's a little controversial because data freaks are. I get the fact that everyone's in love with data. I think actually too much so, honestly. I love my share of data, but I've worked at companies that do these. I mean, they would literally want you to do an experiment to get the data to tell them that you can make it to the store faster on a bike than you can walking. And it's like I could just tell you that without running the experiment, right? And I think that oftentimes companies that have data freaks and data freak cultures tend to be almost paralyzed by that. It takes a long time for them to get enough data to decide to move forward on an initiative when your competitors are doing small little experiments without that data and learning a lot more, a lot faster. And it's really the fast that eat the slow, not the big that eat the small, you know? So
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, one of the things I just see as you bring up these three things is one of the things I talk about is a lot of the bad leadership behaviors I saw in my corporate time. I always say is they're fear based. It's
yes,
always based on fear, and I see maybe an example of, and maybe this is part of the mindset is, you know, I can see the invertebrate fear of conflict, right? I see
yep,
the data freak fear of making a decision that isn't proven truly proven out, right? You know,
right,
it's like they don't want to be the one. Well, hey, this is what the data said, so I just going to do it. So it's
exactly.
fear, and even the chess master might be fear of not achieving what they want in their career, or not having
Yes.
the title, or not having the prestige of being that. So, and that's why they'll act in certain ways to make sure they never lose that job, because that's part of they fear losing that job. So they're going to do things that are toxic in terms of behaviors because they fear of missing out of the perks of the job. Do you
Well,
think?
it's a fear, and I think it would be a fear of not being enough, right? I mean, if they
Yeah,
hold themselves as the one with all of the answers,
yeah,
then, you know, the fear of not being the one with the answer is
yeah,
really scary for a chess master.
yeah. I can see that. So, you mentioned leadership mindset when we first started talking about. So, talk a little bit more about the mindset and where the mindset problem is.
So this is, I think, probably the place where we start shifting from cynical to optimistic, right? Because I think
Okay.
once you understand that your behaviors are really a natural extension of your mindset, you realize that one of the keys to changing your behavior is changing your mindset. So it's not just like, hey, just change your mindset about that, right? There
Yeah.
are three basic components of a mindset. The first is your beliefs. The second is your values, and the third is your principles. So beliefs, values, and principles. Now, beliefs are things like that you can't prove, but you believe anyway. Like, you know, you might, there's never a cop around when you need one. That's a belief, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, or people work better under a deadline. That's a belief. That's a false, actually, leadership belief, but it is one people believe. And so those kinds of things, beliefs, right? Values are comparative. Like I value peace and quiet means I value peace and quiet more than noise, right? I mean,
Mm,
we don't often say the other thing we're comparing it to, but whatever we're saying we value, leaders tend to value things like, I think some toxic leaders tend to value things like loyalty, which
mm.
uh, can be toxic if it's not viewed that. I'll just say it this way since I opened this can of worms. Loyalty is something that bounces back at you when you send it downward, right? It isn't something you can stand there and command. And too many leaders who have loyalty as a value will be the kind that want to command it and punish those who don't give it, right? So I've had those kinds of leaders. Um, and then principles are sort of this idea of like something really large that you've used your values and your beliefs to create. So, for example, I always tell the truth, even
Mm.
when I'm uncomfortable. That honors beliefs you have and values you have, right? And you've kind of summed it up with some statement. We don't have principles for everything in our life, but we have principles for large chunks of things about telling the truth, about how we treat others with respect, or how we expect to be treated the way we treat others, the golden rule, right? So um, when you put those three together, they make up a mindset. Now, here's where behaviors come into play. We only do what makes sense to us as human beings, right? Just to be really drastic with this, even serial killers are doing what makes sense to them,
Mm.
right? We don't agree with it. We all think they're crazy, but they have a set of values, principles, and beliefs that totally make sense to them when they wake up in the morning and go find another victim, right? So the idea here is that just because you have a mindset doesn't mean you're right. It just
Mm.
means you're going to feel right. Okay? So a lot of leaders are walking around feeling right while they're wrong. So
Yes.
this ties back to kind of how we started the conversation, which this idea of like, how do I know I'm a toxic leader? You'll probably feel right about what you're doing, but yet you're not getting the results you want. And the reason you feel right is because it's lining up, your behavior is lining up with your values, your beliefs, and your principles. But so when I'm working with leaders and I'm trying to get them to change something as drastic as what we might say is their personality, when I'm not really asking them to change their personality, what I'm asking them to do is write down their beliefs, write down their values and their principles, and don't try to censor them. You're not showing them to anyone, just write them down and then see if any of those line up with the behavior that you do. I almost bet they will, because if you change a value or a belief, your behavior is going to change automatically.
Hmm.
So sometimes the best way to influence someone to change is to remind them of a value they have and didn't even know they were violating, right? That's a good example of that.
You're onto something that's really strong, which is, and this is why this is such a fascinating topic, because what you're saying is that these leaders believe in, that they're doing the right thing every day, and yet they're not, and it's impacting their organization, it's impacting their people, they're having turnover problems. One of the things, the question I've been struggling with since I even started this podcast 4 years ago is the people that listen to my podcast, the people that read my books, they're good leaders already and they want to they're working to get better. It's the people that are not good leaders, that are not reading leadership material, they're not trying to get better. And I always try to figure out, how do we reach the people that really, how do we get the doctor to where the people who are sick that need the help? Because I think that a lot of people who are listening to my voice right now are nodding my head because they want to become better, and they love they love consuming leadership content because they want to become better leaders. How do we get this message out to the people that really need it?
So that is the reason why I wrote my book. Because if you ask why, sure, there are 1,000 books on the market about leadership, right? I'm both trying to talk to the people that you're describing, people who are curious about their own leadership, or is my leadership good or bad, and can I spot it through these behaviors Sean's talking about? But also, we have to take a look at what is bad leadership from the
Hmm.
perspective of the CEO, right? Let's start at the top and maybe even higher, the shareholders, if it's a public company, right? What we ask of our leaders, I say it this way: sometimes your best leader, if you're the CEO, the people you think of as your best leaders are actually terrible leaders. And the
Yeah.
reason that is because what you're grading them on is their ability to meet your objectives. Those
Yeah.
objectives are probably financial and quite dehuman by that point, right? Like, did you achieve the initiative that we said you were going to achieve? Did you achieve it under budget and on time? Fantastic leadership, Bill. Good job, right? But it's actually, if half of Bill's staff wants to quit now after that, then we don't have a great leader in Bill. And that's the problem. This is the reason why those people don't get help, because they are being praised by their very financially oriented incentives and objectives. And they never circle back and say, yeah, it was great that I did this, but half my team quit after I did it. So maybe I need to find a better way to do it.
Yeah, you've nailed something, and this is something I've also come to terms with, is that we actually measure success in leadership by the view of your followership. So we
Yes.
see how great you are as a follower, and we promote you because you're a great follower, not necessarily as you're a great leader. And
Yes.
yeah, you just nailed it. That's something I've been noticing as well.
Yeah, and I actually worked for a peacock, which is another one of our archetypes. A peacock is somebody that like spreads their feathers to their bosses. So they put
Yeah,
on great dog and pony shows about how great everything is, and it's all because of their brilliant leadership. But if you just look behind them, nobody wants to work for them, right? They're just
yeah,
poisonous to their own organization. That's a peacock. And I worked for a peacock, and I had this exact problem. I had someone that didn't see the value that I added. And it was very disempowering to work under the shadow of these feathers, as I would
yeah.
say. Um, so yeah, the archetypes are quite revealing when you look at them. You might see spots of yourself in there. And I was
Yeah.
one more thing I was going to mention about the peacock, which is that behavior, the peacock behavior, doesn't work if the leaders above the peacock don't let it work, right? So like you just described, right? So if this peacock that I'm referring to had gone to their leader with this big dog and pony show and said, you know, oh, look at this, all these brilliant wins we've gotten here, right? If I was the leader, I would say, these are really nice. However, your engagement scores are some of the lowest in the company.
Hmm.
So, right, like I'm glad that you're getting these wins, but if 50% of your staff wants to quit, that's actually going to cost us more than it would be to gain whatever we're gaining from these wins you're showing us, right? It's not good enough that you got the wins. You have to get us the wins with people who want to be here.
Yeah. Well, especially now, I think right now, retaining talent is a major issue for corporations and companies because you can go off on your own. You can start your own business. You can, there's no problem with having multiple jobs within 2 year time frame, right? Though these things are not problem anymore. So people are going to leave if they're not feeling like they like who they work for or what they stand for. So yeah, if you're just your talent is leaving the company, and even if you're achieving goals, you're not going to do it for very long.
Well, and the really tragic part about what we're talking about right now is the two things are not mutually exclusive, right?
Yes.
Like you get all that performance that you were rewarding that leader for, you'll get that performance and happy employees. Or you could just command the performance and forget about them being happy. Why would you do that though? You could get a 2 for 1. If you take care of everybody, they'll give you the performance without you doing anything. So
Yeah.
I don't, this is what I think my theory about this as to why this kind of continues to happen is because people know how to command other people, but people do not understand how to motivate other people.
Yes.
And because they don't have, let's be honest, motivation involves human psychology. It's a
Mm.
different field of study than just, can I make my widget makers crank out more widgets, right? It's just a
Yeah.
different, it's harder. I would say it's harder. And
It's
not
one of the
everybody.
hardest. Yeah, one of the hardest things that I always say is, like positional authority. Everybody works for me. I give out the orders. Everybody does what I say. That's pretty easy, to be honest.
Yeah, it
What's
is.
hardest is these roles that you have in companies where you have responsibility, but not the people working for you. Like I was a quality manager for a division, right? I was responsible for all the quality, but nobody worked for me, right? So
Oh,
it was an influential authority, right? So I had to influence people all the time, and they didn't work for me. And I think that's one of the hardest leadership jobs that it can be, is that where you don't really have the authority necessarily, or the people don't directly report to me, but I have to influence them and I have to motivate them and to show them why it's in their best interest to do what I need to have them do. And
but
that's a
what,
hard job.
John, what an interesting setup for how to make a great leader, though, because honestly, even though now you're the CEO of the company, you still act as if you don't have authority. You don't tell
Yes.
people, right, what to do every 5 minutes. You're still asking them, you're still influencing them to do the work well. So it's what a great forcing function for you to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it interesting? So maybe that's what we need to do more of, is give people those kind of roles where they have to do they have to be effective. You have to learn influencing skills. You have to
Yes.
learn how to motivate people that
Yes.
don't work for you. Yeah,
Right.
it's one of the hardest things to do, I always say, but I think it's important that you learn those skills because eventually people will work for you. And like you said, how do you motivate them? That is
I
it's a
spend a
great
lot of time
question.
in the book talking about like how to find the fire in one of your employees and connect it to something you need. So it's like, oh, you've got a fire for, maybe you're a hobbyist photography, you're a photographer. We have a need for that over here, right? And so I
Mm,
like, how do I help something that you have a fire in? uh that's happened so many times in my career where I some hobby that I have is something that I offered in a time of emergency, something the company needed. Like, for example, I used to be a database designer many years ago. Sometimes the company needs a rapid database put together to track a hot project they're working on, and there was nobody to do it. And I would say, well, I could do it. And you can? Yeah. And then I would just go do it. And I was the happiest employee. These are not people, I didn't feel manipulated at all. I felt motivated. I felt like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. So you're paying me to do this. I can't believe it. I get to do what I want to do, and you're getting a benefit from it.
mm.
Fantastic.
But it's funny because if to be able to do that as a leader, you need to know your people and you need to know what
Yes.
fires them up. And that's one of the things that I notice is that we don't want to take the time to get to know our people. When we do, we find that they have some interesting skill sets, or there's some interesting background that could be just what we need to
Yep.
help move a project forward, or or resolve a situation. So, and if
Yep.
they're motivated intrinsically to do that thing, like I've been put on earth to do that one thing, and you give them that opportunity in pursuit of the company's goals, you just have to get out of the way.
That's
you know
right. Just connect this lightning bolt to that receptor and get out of the way. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been really powerful, Sean. I really like this book. I really like what you're doing. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners about this topic?
I would say just two things, right? One, cultures are changeable, right?
Yeah.
If you feel like you're a victim of the culture at your company, just remember this: the building and the sign on the side of the building does not have a culture. Okay, it's an empty shell. The culture shows up every day when the people show up. So think of it that way. You're not a victim of your culture, you're co-creating it every day. The behaviors you allow and disallow and encourage and discourage are the ones that form the culture of your company. So lead by example. Be the growth person you're hoping to be. Read a book like mine, or other ones like it. Look for the behaviors that you might be doing wrong and try to change them. And then the second thing I would tell people is that the thing we just said, I want to leave people with the idea that these are not mutually exclusive, that a people-centered culture is going to get you all the performance you could ever want from your employees, right? You're just not going to have to worry about it. You have to worry about getting them to be in the right mindset and want to be where they are. And once you do that, you'll get the performance and your bonus and all the other incentives.
I love that. It's such an important lesson. I wish more people would talk about it and more people would hear that message and learn it. It's about the people and the mission. Your job is not just the mission. Your job is not just the people. It's the people and the mission.
That's right.
And if you can put those two together, and you get people motivated to do what they love to do in pursuit of that mission, life can get really good. They're not mutually exclusive, and you can do them together. Such an important lesson. This is such an important book. One Drop of Poison is your book. How can people find out more about this book and your company?
So you can link up with me on LinkedIn. It's Sean Lemson, and it's Sean spelled like Sean Connery, Sean. Um, and you can also visit my website at motivatedoutcomes.com. If any of your listeners need help turning around a morale problem or an engagement issue, they're welcome to reach out to me at Sean@motivatedoutcomes.com. And also, folks can check out my YouTube channel, which I'm just getting started. So it's not I'm not a big content creator, but I do have a lot of stuff up there that I'm working on, and all things about team performance and leadership performance. And I'm making a video for each of the archetypes, for example. I'm still working through them, but they're going up there. So good stuff on the YouTube channel.
Outstanding. We're going to put links in the show notes for all of Sean's resources. Sean, this is powerful. The stuff that you're talking about is really essential. And again, I'm talking from a 30-year perspective of a practitioner. I'm working on a PhD in leadership. I understand this stuff. I've been doing it my whole life, and you're talking about some really important things. Listeners, I highly encourage you to go out there and get this book, One Drop of Poison. This is going to be a difference maker in your life, because just understanding what these archetypes are and some of the behaviors and the motivations behind that, the mindset behind that, is going to help you make sure that you don't have any toxic elements in your leadership. Make sure you can be more effective. Clean that up. Get that worked on. And again, this might be the perfect book to anonymously give a bad boss that you have.
Yes.
I'm going to highly recommend Sean's book for that purpose. And
Yeah.
I may do it. Listeners, if you have a bad boss, give me a DM, and we'll talk. We'll get Sean's book out to your boss. We'll send it anonymously, because I think more bosses need to read this book and be aware of what their challenges are. Because again, I think they think in their minds that they're doing the right thing, but they're not. So they really need to learn this. Sean, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for writing this book and what you're doing in leadership today.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a great conversation. I really appreciated it.
Oh, I loved it. So it's great having you on the show.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.